The wind tore past Judith's ears as she plummeted toward the earth, her husband's face growing smaller in the helicopter door above her. The last thing she saw was Norman's cold smile. Not the panicked expression of a man who had just lost his wife in a tragic accident, but the calculated look of someone who had just committed murder. Chapter 1. The Fall. 3 seconds earlier, she had been leaning out of the helicopter, her red anniversary dress catching the golden light of the setting sun as she marveled at the Colorado Rockies stretching endlessly below. Norman had suggested this romantic helicopter tour for their 3rd wedding anniversary, and she had been so touched by the gesture. He rarely did anything romantic anymore, always buried in his work at the aviation consulting firm where he was a partner and licensed pilot. "Look down there, babe," he had said, his voice barely audible over the helicopter's rotor blades. "See that lake? They say it's over 200 feet deep." She had smiled and leaned forward, the cool mountain air rushing against her face. That's when she felt his hands on her back. Not gentle, not loving, but firm and deliberate. The safety harness that should have been securing her had been loosened. She realized too late. The door that should have been locked was suddenly open. "Norman, what are you?" But the words were lost in the wind as his hands pushed hard against her shoulders, sending her tumbling into the vast emptiness below. For a moment, she couldn't process what was happening. This had to be an accident. Her husband of 3 years, the man who had swept her off her feet at a charity gala, who had promised to support her dreams, couldn't do this to her. As she fell, fragments of the past few months flashed through her mind like a nightmare slideshow. Norman's sudden interest in upgrading their life insurance policies. His insistence that they both increase their coverage for protection, now that they were thinking about starting a family. The way he had been working late more often, the smell of expensive perfume that wasn't hers lingering on his dress shirts. The credit card bills showing luxury hotel charges in cities where he claimed to be at aviation conferences. The hushed phone calls with Vanessa Grant, his business partner, that ended abruptly whenever Judith entered the room. The mountain lake rushed up to meet her, and Judith closed her eyes, preparing for the end. She thought about her childhood in Chicago, growing up with her aunt who had raised her after her mother died of cancer. She thought about her job as a physical therapist, all the patients she had helped regain their mobility, all the lives she had touched. She thought about her business administration master's degree, the dream of opening her own rehabilitation clinic that she had put on hold when she married Norman and moved to Colorado for his career. But instead of the hard surface of the lake, she felt the sharp branches of a towering pine tree breaking her fall. Pain exploded through her body as she crashed through the canopy, each branch slowing her descent. Her left shoulder dislocated with a sickening pop, and she felt her ribs crack as she hit a thick branch. Blood ran down her face from cuts made by the smaller branches, but she was alive. She broke through the last layer of branches and plunged into the icy mountain lake with a force that knocked the breath from her lungs. The freezing water shocked her system, but the cold also slowed her bleeding. She kicked toward the surface with her good arm, breaking through just as her vision began to darken. Above her, she could hear the helicopter circling, probably making sure she was dead. She forced herself to remain still, floating face up among the reeds near the shore, to play dead even though every instinct told her to scream for help. The helicopter circled for more times before flying away. Only then did Judith allow herself to move, to take inventory of her injuries. Her left shoulder was definitely dislocated. She had several broken ribs, and she was bleeding from dozens of cuts. But she was alive, and more importantly, she was angry. She managed to swim one-armed to the rocky shore, each movement sending waves of pain through her body. Collapsing on the bank, she could see through the trees a dirt road about a quarter-mile away, and beyond that, what looked like a ranger station with a truck parked outside. Using her good arm and sheer force of will, she began dragging herself toward it, leaving a trail of blood and lake water behind her. Each movement felt like knives in her ribs, but she refused to give up. It took her 45 agonizing minutes to reach the ranger station. The young ranger, a woman named Sarah Mitchell, found her collapsed against the building's wooden stairs. She called 911 immediately, and within minutes, a medical helicopter was en route to airlift her to the trauma center in Denver. As the paramedics worked on her, Judith made a decision. She wouldn't tell anyone the truth about what had happened. Not yet. She would let Norman think his plan had worked, let him believe she was dead. And then, when he least expected it, she would destroy him. The last thing she remembered before losing consciousness was the paramedic asking her what had happened. "Accident," she whispered through cracked, bloodied lips.
Hélicoptère accident.
"I don't remember how I fell, but it wasn't an accident." And Norman was about to learn that some falls don't kill you. They just make you stronger, smarter, and infinitely more dangerous. Chapter 2. The Awakening. Judith woke up in the hospital 4 days later to find a nurse checking her vitals. The woman's name tag read Linda Alvarez, and she had kind eyes that reminded Judith of her aunt back in Chicago. "Well, hello there, miracle girl," Linda said with a warm smile. "You gave us quite a scare. The doctors weren't sure you were going to make it." Judith tried to speak, but her throat was raw and dry. Linda quickly brought her a cup of water with a straw, helping her take small sips. The cool liquid felt like heaven against her parched throat. What happened to me?" Judith asked, though she remembered everything with painful, crystal clarity. "Helicopter accident," Linda said, consulting her chart. "You fell from approximately 2,000 feet according to the search and rescue team. It's a miracle you survived. That stand of pine trees broke your fall just enough, and landing in the lake instead of on rocks saved your life. You're the luckiest woman I've ever treated." Judith nodded slowly, processing the information. "My husband, is he?" "He's fine, honey. Been here every single day since they airlifted you in." Linda's voice was warm with sympathy. "The poor man is beside himself with grief and worry. He's down in the cafeteria right now, but I can call him if you'd like." "No," Judith said quickly, then softened her tone. "Not yet. I need some time to remember everything." Linda nodded understandingly. "You have a severe concussion and some memory fragmentation, so confusion is normal. Take your time. Your husband mentioned that you two were on a romantic sunset tour for your anniversary when something went wrong with the aircraft. He said the pilot hit unexpected turbulence and you were thrown from the helicopter when your harness failed." Judith's jaw tightened imperceptibly. So that was going to be his story. She had been thrown from the helicopter due to equipment failure or turbulence, not pushed by her loving husband who wanted to cash in on her $2.5 million life insurance policy. "The pilot?" she asked carefully. "What happened to him?" "He's recovering in the ICU on the 4th floor. Managed to land the helicopter in a meadow about 2 miles from where you fell." He sustained some injuries, but nothing life-threatening. Linda paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. Actually, he keeps saying something doesn't add up, that everything was functioning perfectly and he doesn't understand what happened. But the investigators said he probably hit wind shear he wasn't expecting. Linda trailed off, seeming to realize she might be saying too much. Well, I'm sure the FAA investigation will figure it all out. The important thing is that you're alive and recovering. After Linda left, Judith stared at the ceiling, her mind racing despite the pain medication coursing through her veins. The pilot was alive, which meant there was a witness to what had really happened. But would he have seen Norman push her? From the pilot's position facing forward, operating the controls, he might not have seen anything in the passenger compartment behind him. She needed to be careful. If Norman suspected she knew the truth, he might try to finish what he started. Hospital rooms had plenty of ways for accidents to happen to patients. Medication errors, disconnected monitors, a pillow over the face when no one was looking. For now, she would play the part of the confused, grateful wife who had survived a terrible accident. Chapter 3. The Performance. When Norman finally came to visit that evening, Judith was ready for him. She had practiced her expression in the reflection of the darkened television screen mounted on the wall. Confused, vulnerable, loving, slightly scared. She had thought carefully about what she would say, how she would act. "Oh, Norman," she said weakly when he entered the room, her voice breaking in just the right way. "I was so scared. I thought I was going to die." Norman's face was a perfect mask of concern and relief, but Judith could see something else flickering in his blue eyes. Disappointment? Frustration? He had been expecting to collect insurance money on a dead wife, and instead she was very much alive and recovering. "Thank God you're okay," he said, moving to her bedside and taking her uninjured hand. His grip was gentle, but she could feel the tension in his fingers. "I was so worried. When I saw you fall from the helicopter, I thought I had lost you forever." His hand felt cold against hers, and she had to fight the urge to pull away, to scream that she knew what he'd done. This was the same hand that had pushed her to what should have been her death. "I don't remember much," she lied, letting her voice waver. "Just falling, and pain, and then waking up here. The nurse said there was some kind of equipment failure with the helicopter." "That's what the investigators think," Norman said smoothly, his voice carrying just the right note of traumatized confusion. "The pilot is still recovering, so we don't have all the details yet. But the important thing is that you're alive. You're going to be okay. We're going to get through this together." They talked for a few more minutes, with Norman playing the role of the devoted, shaken husband perfectly. He told her about how he had been beside himself with worry, how he had barely left the hospital since she was airlifted in. He mentioned that he had already contacted their insurance company about the accident, just to make sure all your medical bills would be covered, he said with apparent concern. He even teared up when describing how he'd had to call her Aunt Marie in Chicago to tell her about the accident, how devastated everyone was, how grateful they all were that she had survived. After he left, claiming he needed to make some calls to update family and handle some urgent business matters, Judith lay in her hospital bed staring at the ceiling. She knew she couldn't stay here much longer. As soon as she was discharged, she would need to disappear before Norman realized she knew the truth about what he had done. She began making plans. She would need help, and she knew exactly who to call. Her childhood friend Marcus Chen, who now worked as a private investigator in Denver. Marcus had grown up with her in Chicago, had been protective of her since they were kids. He had never liked Norman, had warned Judith that something seemed off about the guy. Too polished, too perfect, like he was playing a role. Marcus would help. He had to. The next morning, Judith asked Linda for a private moment. "I need to make a phone call," she said quietly, glancing at the door. "But I don't want my husband to know about it. Can you help me?" Linda looked concerned, her experienced nurse's instincts clearly sensing something beneath the surface. "Is everything okay, honey? You seem troubled. If you're in any kind of danger, I just need to call an old friend," Judith interrupted gently. "Someone who can help me remember some things about the accident. I'm still so confused about what happened, and I think talking to him might help clear my head." Linda studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I'll bring you a phone. Take all the time you need." When she was sure she was alone, Judith dialed Marcus's number with trembling fingers, praying he still had the same cell phone. He answered on the second ring. "Chun Investigations." "Marcus?" she whispered, her voice breaking with real emotion now. "It's Judith. I need your help, and I need you to trust me. Something terrible has happened, and I think my husband just tried to kill me." There was a beat of silence. Then Marcus's voice came back sharp and focused. "Where are you? Are you safe right now?" "Denver Medical Center, ICU. But Marcus, you can't come as yourself. Norman can't know I've contacted anyone. Can you? I'm already thinking of a cover. Give me 3 hours. Don't talk to anyone else until I get there. And Judith, if what you're saying is true, be very, very careful. Men who try once usually try again." Chapter 4. The Truth Unveiled. Marcus arrived at the hospital the next afternoon disguised as a medical equipment technician, complete with a credential badge that would pass a casual inspection and a rolling cart of diagnostic equipment. He was a lean man of Chinese descent with sharp, intelligent features and an even sharper mind, qualities that made him an excellent private investigator. He worked his way into her room during shift change, when the halls were busy and no one was paying close attention to the comings and goings of hospital staff. "I've been doing some digging since you called," Marcus said quietly as he pretended to check the equipment beside her bed, his voice barely above a whisper. "And Judith, what I found, it's worse than you think." He pulled out a tablet from his equipment cart, angling it so only she could see the screen. "First, the insurance policy. Norman took out a $2.5 million policy on you 6 months ago. You signed the paperwork, but I'm betting you don't remember the amount being that high." Judith's breath caught. "I thought it was for $500,000. That's what he told me when I signed." "He had you sign multiple documents that day, didn't he? Probably mixed in with mortgage refinance papers or investment documents." She nodded slowly, remembering. Norman had brought home a stack of paperwork, explaining they were consolidating their finances, refinancing for a better rate. She'd been rushing to get to a patient's home visit and had signed quickly, trusting him completely. "There's more," Marcus continued, swiping to the next screen. "Vanessa Grant, his business partner. They've been having an affair for at least 14 months. I've got hotel receipts, text messages I pulled from phone records, photos from a private investigator she hired when she suspected her husband was cheating. Turns out it was with another woman, but he got photos of Vanessa with Norman as collateral. The photos showed Norman and Vanessa, a striking blonde woman in her late 30s, in intimate embraces outside hotels, kissing in parking garages, holding hands at restaurants in towns far from Denver. But here's where it gets really interesting, Marcus said, his voice dropping even lower. Richardson Aviation Consulting has some serious financial irregularities. I have a contact in the industry who flagged some concerns about their billing practices. It looks like Norman and Vanessa have been systematically overcharging clients for consulting services and pocketing the difference. We're talking about at least $400,000 over the past 3 years. Judith felt bile rise in her throat. So he needed me dead not just for the insurance money, but because if his fraud gets discovered, he'll need that money for legal fees. Or to run. Exactly. And there's one more thing. Marcus pulled up another document. The helicopter company. Norman specifically requested that aircraft, that pilot, that time slot. He called in a favor from an old friend who owns the company. The maintenance logs show the harness system was inspected and functioning perfectly the day before. But Norman had access to the aircraft for about 30 minutes before you arrived for the tour. He told the staff he wanted to set up a surprise for your anniversary. He loosened my harness, Judith whispered, the pieces falling into place. That's why it gave way so easily when he pushed me. The pilot, his name is Tom Hendricks, has been telling anyone who'll listen that something wasn't right. He said he heard you scream Norman's name, but by the time he turned around, you were already falling and Norman was reaching out as if trying to grab you. The door was open, and Norman claimed you'd insisted on opening it for better photos despite his warnings. Judith closed her eyes, remembering Norman's careful planning. The red dress he'd insisted she wear, saying it would look beautiful in photos. The specific request for the sunset tour when lighting would be dramatic. The positioning of her seat near the door. "What do I do?" she asked, opening her eyes to meet Marcus's steady gaze. "First, you need to disappear. If Norman thinks you suspect anything, or if he realizes his plan failed and you might remember what really happened, he'll try again. Second, we build an airtight case, not just for the attempted murder, but for the fraud. We make sure he can't wriggle out of this with expensive lawyers and character witnesses. How do I disappear from a hospital where he visits every day?" Marcus smiled grimly. "We fake your death. For real this time. I have contacts who can make it happen. You die from complications, an embolism, something sudden and medically plausible given your injuries. We'll need Linda's help, and maybe one of the doctors, but I know people who owe me favors. And then you become someone else. Someone with the resources and positioning to get close to Norman's business, to gather evidence from the inside while I work the outside. Someone he won't recognize because he'll think you're dead and buried." Marcus paused. "It'll take time, months of recovery, transformation, planning, but when we're done, he won't just lose his freedom. He'll lose everything he killed you for." Judith looked at the photos of Norman and Vanessa on the tablet, at the insurance documents with her forged signature, at the evidence of systematic theft and betrayal. She thought about the 3 years she'd spent supporting Norman's career, putting her own dreams on hold, believing in their partnership. "Do it," she said, her voice steady despite the rage burning in her chest. "Kill Judith McDowell. And let's create someone who can destroy Norman Richardson from the inside out." Chapter 5. The Death of Judith McDowell. Took Marcus 3 days to arrange everything. Linda Alvarez, once she understood the full situation, became a fierce ally. She'd been a nurse for 22 years and had seen enough abusive situations to know when a woman was in genuine danger. She recruited Dr. Sarah Kim, a trauma surgeon who had herself escaped a dangerous marriage years earlier. "We do this right," Dr. Kim said during their whispered planning session late one night, "or we don't do it at all. The death has to be completely believable, documented, irreversible." They settled on a pulmonary embolism, a blood clot that traveled to Judith's lungs, a known complication of her injuries and immobility. It was sudden enough to be tragic, medical enough to be unquestionable, and common enough that no one would suspect foul play. Norman visited on the evening they'd chosen, playing his role perfectly. He brought flowers, white lilies, Judith noticed, traditionally associated with funerals, and sat beside her bed talking about their future. "When you're better, we'll take a real vacation," he said, holding her hand. "Somewhere tropical. No helicopters this time." He laughed, and she had to resist the urge to flinch at his casual cruelty. "That sounds wonderful," she said softly, maintaining her performance of the recovering, trusting wife. After he left, Dr. Kim administered a sedative that would make Judith appear unconscious and lower her vital signs dramatically. Linda adjusted the monitors so the readings would support the narrative they were creating. At 2:47 a.m., the monitors began alarming. The night staff rushed in to find Judith unresponsive, her oxygen levels plummeting. Dr. Kim arrived within minutes, barking orders, starting a resuscitation protocol that was real enough to satisfy anyone watching but carefully calibrated to fail. At 3:04 a.m., Dr. Kim called the time of death. Linda personally made the call to Norman at 3:15 a.m. Judith, heavily sedated but conscious, could hear Linda's end of the conversation from the private room where they'd moved her. "Mr. Richardson? This is Linda Alvarez from Denver Medical. I'm so sorry, but there's been a complication. Your wife, she's passed away. A pulmonary embolism. It was very sudden. We did everything we could." She could hear Norman's voice through the phone, loud with shock and disbelief. "What? No, that's impossible. I was just there. She was fine. She was recovering. These things can happen without warning, especially with trauma patients. I'm so very sorry for your loss. If you can come to the hospital, there are some papers you'll need to sign." Judith lay in the darkened room, listening to the sounds of her own death being processed. Soon, she heard Norman's voice in the hallway, demanding to see her body, demanding to know what had happened. Dr. Kim handled him expertly, using medical jargon and compassionate firmness to explain the unexplainable. Through a crack in the door, Judith watched Norman's performance. He was crying, actual tears streaming down his face. His hands trembled as he signed the preliminary paperwork. He looked devastated, destroyed by grief. But she saw it just for a moment when he thought no one was watching. As he turned away from the nurse's station, his face was blank, calculating. He pulled out his phone and typed a quick text. Even from a distance, she could read his body language. Relief. After he left, Marcus appeared with a wheelchair. They'd parked a plain white van in the loading dock area, disguised as a medical supply delivery vehicle. Linda helped Judith into street clothes, jeans, a hoodie, sunglasses to hide her recognizable features. "The death certificate will be filed tomorrow," Dr. Kim said as they prepared to wheel her out. "I've signed it personally, As far as the state of Colorado is concerned, Judith Marie McDowell died at 3:04 a.m. from a pulmonary embolism secondary to traumatic injuries. There will be no autopsy. The cause of death is clear, and your husband won't push for one because it might reveal his tampering with the helicopter. What about the body? Judith asked. He'll want a funeral. There will be one, Marcus said. A closed casket. One of my contacts runs a funeral home and owes me a favor. The casket will contain the appropriate weight in sandbags. Norman won't question it. He'll want this over with quickly, so he can collect the insurance and move on with his life. As they wheeled her through the service corridors and loading docks, Judith felt a strange sense of displacement. She was alive, but Judith McDowell was truly dead. Everything she'd been, the physical therapist, the dutiful wife, the woman who always saw the best in people, was gone. Marcus drove her to a safe house he'd arranged. A small cabin in the mountains west of Denver, owned by a retired FBI agent who asked no questions. For the next 3 weeks, Judith stayed there, recovering physically and beginning her transformation mentally. She watched her own funeral from a laptop Marcus had secured for her. He'd planted a tiny camera in the lapel of his suit jacket, so she could see everything. The service was small. Her Aunt Marie had flown in from Chicago, weeping openly. Judith's co-workers from the physical therapy clinic were there, along with some of Norman's business associates. Norman stood at the front, accepting condolences, looking appropriately shattered. Vanessa Grant was there too, standing at a respectful distance, her expression professionally sympathetic. But Judith saw them exchange a look when they thought no one was watching. A look of barely suppressed triumph. At the burial, Norman placed a single white lily on the casket. I love you, Judith, he said loud enough for others to hear. I'll never forget you. But as the mourners dispersed, Judith watched through Marcus's camera feed as Norman pulled out his phone and scrolled through something that made him smile. Later, Marcus would retrieve the phone records. Norman had been looking at a text from Vanessa that read simply, "Finally, tonight." That evening, Marcus sent Judith footage from a different camera, one he'd placed near a high-end restaurant in downtown Denver. There was Norman and Vanessa, in a private booth, champagne glasses raised in a toast. They were laughing, Vanessa's hand on Norman's arm, his fingers intertwined with hers on top of the table. Judith watched the footage 3 times, memorizing their expressions, their body language, their casual cruelty. With each viewing, she felt the last remnants of her old self, the part that had loved Norman, that had wanted to believe the best of him, burn away like paper in a flame. Good, she said aloud to the empty cabin. Celebrate now, because I'm going to take everything from you, Norman. Everything you stole from me, everything you killed me for, and you're never going to see it coming. She closed the laptop and looked at her reflection in the darkened screen. A different woman looked back at her now, harder, sharper, forged in betrayal and reborn in vengeance. Judith McDowell was dead. Diana Westbrook was about to be born. Chapter 6. Resurrection as Diana Westbrook. The transformation took 8 months. Marcus had moved Judith to a series of safe houses, always staying one step ahead of any potential discovery. The first 2 months were focused on physical recovery. Her ribs healed slowly. Her shoulder required intensive physical therapy. Ironic, given her profession. And the scars from her fall through the pine trees faded but never completely disappeared. She used her own professional knowledge to rehabilitate herself, pushing her body harder than she ever had before. The soft, gentle physical therapist who had spent years helping others heal became relentless with herself. She added strength training, running at high altitude in the mountains, yoga for flexibility and mental discipline. By month 3, she was in the best physical shape of her life. But the physical transformation was only the beginning. Marcus brought in a stylist from Los Angeles, a woman named Simone who specialized in complete image transformations for clients in witness protection. "I have connections who specialize in deep identity creation," Marcus said. "Some of these photos are AI generated, some are real photos from stock databases that have been carefully edited. Some are from willing participants who get paid to pretend they met you at events. Your social media is backdated and carefully curated. Anyone doing due diligence will find exactly what they expect to find." The financial backing was real. Marcus had helped Judith liquidate everything she'd had in her old life. Her retirement accounts, savings, even the secret emergency fund she'd kept before marriage were converted into Diana Westbrook's investment capital. Marcus added funds from his own resources and from silent partners who specialized in helping people rebuild after dangerous situations. By month 5, Judith spent hours every day studying venture capital, aviation industry regulations, corporate finance, and business strategy. She read everything she could about Norman's company, his clients, his competitors. She studied Vanessa Grant's background, her patterns, her weaknesses. Marcus brought in a voice coach who helped her modulate her tone. "You have a naturally warm, empathetic voice," the coach explained. "It puts patients at ease. Diana needs a different vocal signature, still pleasant, but with an edge of authority. Slightly lower pitch, more direct communication style." There were etiquette classes on fine dining, wine selection, art appreciation, all the cultural markers of serious wealth. A finance professor Marcus knew coached her on talking the language of investors, on asking the right questions, on projecting confidence in boardrooms. "Remember," the professor said during one of their sessions, "actual expertise matters, but perceived expertise matters more. You need to walk into a room of experienced aviation consultants and make them believe you've been doing this for 15 years. By month 7, when Judith looked in the mirror, she saw Diana Westbrook, a formidable woman who looked younger than her 33 years, sophisticated, intimidating, someone who had clearly spent her life accumulating power and success. Marcus arranged for her to attend a smaller aviation industry conference in Phoenix as a final test. Judith walked in wearing a charcoal gray designer suit, her hair perfect, her confidence unshakable. She networked effortlessly, discussed industry trends with seasoned professionals, and handed out business cards for Westbrook Capital, her newly established investment firm. Nobody questioned her. Nobody saw through the performance. She was exactly who she claimed to be. On her last evening at the conference, she stood on her hotel balcony looking out at the Phoenix lights. Marcus joined her, bringing 2 glasses of wine. "You're ready," he said simply. "Diana Westbrook is real now. The question is, are you ready to face Norman?" Judith, no, Diana now, took a sip of wine and smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of a predator that had spent 8 months watching its prey from the shadows, learning its patterns, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. "I'm not just ready to face him, Marcus. I'm ready to destroy him. And the beautiful thing? He's going to invite me in. He's going to see a wealthy investor who wants to give him money, who's impressed by his company, who finds him charming and capable." She turned to look at Marcus, her eyes hard and bright. He's going to welcome his own destruction with open arms, and he'll never know he invited his dead wife to dinner. 3 weeks later, Diana Westbrook's firm sent an inquiry to Richardson Aviation Consulting expressing interest in potentially acquiring a significant stake in the company. Norman Richardson's response was enthusiastic and immediate. The trap was set. Chapter 7. The Calculated Encounter. Marcus had orchestrated the first accidental meeting with surgical precision. Denver was hosting the annual Rocky Mountain Aviation Summit at the Hyatt Regency, and Richardson Aviation Consulting had a booth in the exhibition hall. Norman would be there, networking, pitching potential clients, playing the successful businessman. Diana arrived on the second day of the conference, after Norman had already established his presence. She wore a tailored navy blue suit with a cream silk blouse, her natural curls styled in a sophisticated updo that would have been completely foreign to the Judith that Norman had known. Diamond studs, real ones, courtesy of Marcus's investment in her transformation, glinted at her ears. Her makeup was flawless. Her designer bag cost more than a monthly mortgage payment, and her entire bearing screamed power and money. She'd practiced this moment 1,000 times in her mind, but as she walked through the convention center lobby, her heart hammered against her ribs. What if he recognized something in her eyes? What if some unconscious part of him sensed who she really was? But she'd come too far to back down now. The exhibition hall was crowded with industry professionals, the air filled with conversation and the occasional demonstration of aircraft technology. Diana moved through the space with purpose, stopping occasionally to examine displays, exchange business cards, make small talk, all while keeping Norman's booth in her peripheral vision. He was there, talking animatedly with a potential client, his hands gesturing as he explained something about flight safety protocols. His sandy hair was styled the same way he'd always worn it, his suit expensive but not ostentatious. He looked successful, confident, completely unburdened by guilt. Vanessa Grant was there too, standing slightly behind Norman, her blonde hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail. She wore a professional dress and heels, playing the role of the competent business partner. Diana watched them exchange a subtle glance, intimate, possessive. They'd clearly grown bolder in the months since Judith's death. Diana took a breath, centered herself, and began her approach. She timed it perfectly, arriving at the Richardson Aviation booth just as Norman's previous conversation was wrapping up. "Mr. Richardson?" she said, her voice carrying the modulated tone she'd practiced, confident, slightly lower than her natural register, with an undertone of polished professionalism. "Diana Westbrook, Westbrook Capital. I've been reading about your company's innovative approach to aviation safety consulting." Norman turned, and for a split second, Diana's heart stopped. This was the moment of truth. Would he see his dead wife standing in front of him? But his expression showed only professional interest mixed with immediate attraction. His eyes tracked over her face, her designer clothes, the expensive watch on her wrist, all the visual markers of wealth and success. "Ms. Westbrook," he said, extending his hand with a warm smile. "Norman Richardson. It's a pleasure to meet you. I'm familiar with Westbrook Capital. You've made some impressive moves in the aerospace sector recently." His handshake was firm, his palm warm against hers. Diana forced herself to meet his eyes directly, to show no hint of recognition, no flicker of the rage burning beneath her polished surface. Please call me Diana. And thank you. We've been strategically positioning ourselves in this space for a few years now. The lie came easily. She'd practiced her backstory until it was second nature. I'm particularly interested in companies that combine technical expertise with personalized client service. From what I've heard, Richardson Aviation seems to have found that sweet spot. That's exactly our model, Norman said enthusiastically, gesturing for her to step closer to their display. Vanessa moved in, her professional smile not quite reaching her eyes. Diana could feel the other woman assessing her, evaluating potential threats. Diana, this is my business partner, Vanessa Grant. She oversees our operations and client relations. Pleased to meet you, Diana said, shaking Vanessa's hand. The other woman's grip was cool, her smile tighter now that she'd clocked Norman's obvious interest in the attractive, wealthy investor before them. Westbrook Capital, Vanessa said, her tone carefully neutral. I read about your investment in Skyward Dynamics last year. That was quite a coup. We saw potential that others overlooked, Diana replied smoothly. Marcus had spent weeks fabricating that particular investment history, complete with press releases and financial documents. I believe in doing deep due diligence before committing capital. I like to really understand the people behind a company, not just the numbers. Norman's eyes lit up. That's exactly how we operate. Aviation safety isn't just about protocols and regulations. It's about the human factor, understanding how people interact with complex systems. Maybe we could continue this conversation somewhere quieter? The conference has an excellent restaurant upstairs. Diana pretended to check her watch, as if considering her schedule. In reality, she'd cleared her entire day specifically for this moment. I have about an hour before my next meeting, she said. That should give us time for a preliminary conversation. They settled into a corner booth at the hotel restaurant, with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Denver. Vanessa had excused herself, claiming she needed to handle a client call, but Diana had seen the flash of irritation in her eyes. Norman hadn't invited her to join them. Over coffee and artisan sandwiches, Diana ordered the most expensive item on the menu without hesitation. A small power move she'd learned. They talked business. Norman described Richardson Aviation's client base, their safety consulting methodology, their growth trajectory. He was smooth, polished, the perfect pitch. Diana asked pointed questions, demonstrating knowledge that impressed him. She'd learned the aviation industry inside and out over the past 8 months, and she used that expertise now. Your approach to human factors in aviation is interesting, she said, but I'm curious about your scalability. How do you maintain quality when you're dealing with the kind of growth your revenue numbers suggest? Norman leaned forward, clearly engaged. That's the right question. We've been very selective about expansion. We'd rather grow sustainably than compromise our standards. As he talked, Diana studied him. This was the man who had pushed her from a helicopter, who had planned her murder down to the last detail. Yet here he sat, charming and confident, showing absolutely no remorse, no hesitation, no humanity. I've lost someone in an aviation accident, Diana said suddenly, deviating from her planned script. The lie felt true as she spoke it. That's part of why I care so much about this sector. Safety isn't just a business concern for me. It's personal. Norman's expression shifted to practiced sympathy. I'm so sorry to hear that. Actually, I lost my wife almost a year ago.
Hélicoptère accident.
It was. He paused, his eyes distant. It was devastating. Diana felt ice in her veins, but her expression remained sympathetic and interested. I'm very sorry. That must have been incredibly difficult. It was. Still is some days. But I've tried to channel that grief into making sure other families don't have to go through what I did. Every safety protocol we implement, every recommendation we make, I think about her. The audacity of it took her breath away. He was using her death, her murder, as a selling point, as proof of his commitment to aviation safety. That's admirable, Diana said, her voice steady despite the rage coiling in her stomach, turning tragedy into purpose. They talked for another 40 minutes. Norman was clearly attracted to her. He laughed at her jokes, found excuses to lean closer, maintained intense eye contact. Diana played it perfectly, showing interest but maintaining professional boundaries, hinting at possibilities without committing to anything. As they prepared to leave, Norman handed her his business card. I'd love to continue this conversation, Diana. Maybe we could schedule a proper meeting at our offices. I could show you our operation, introduce you to our team, walk you through some case studies. I'd like that, Diana said, accepting the card. She pulled out her own thick, expensive cardstock with Diana Westbrook's name embossed in elegant script. Have your assistant reach out to mine. I'm in town for the next few weeks closing another deal, so my schedule is flexible. They shook hands again, and Norman held on just a beat longer than necessary. It was truly a pleasure meeting you, Diana. I have a feeling this could be the beginning of a very productive partnership. Diana smiled, and this time, she let a bit of predatory satisfaction show through. I have the same feeling, Norman. I think we're going to work very well together. She walked away without looking back, her heels clicking on the polished floor. Only when she reached her rental car in the parking garage did she let herself exhale, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the steering wheel. Marcus called within minutes. He'd been watching from a distance, ready to intervene if anything went wrong. How do you feel? He asked. Diana stared at her reflection in the rearview mirror, the woman who looked nothing like Judith McDowell but who carried all of her rage and determination. He didn't recognize me at all, Marcus. He looked right at me, shook my hand, told me about his tragic loss, and he had no idea he was talking to his victim. She laughed, the sound bitter and sharp. He's already attracted to Diana. He sees dollar signs and possibility. He has no clue he just invited a ghost to haunt him. Are you sure you can do this? Marcus asked seriously. Being this close to him, maintaining this facade? I've never been more sure of anything, Diana said. Because every time I want to break character, every time I want to scream at him about what he did, I'll remember him sitting across from me using my death as a marketing tool, using my murder to sell his commitment to safety. She started the car, pulling out of the parking garage into the bright Denver sunlight. He thinks he got away with it, Marcus. He thinks he's invincible. But I'm going to get so close to him, so embedded in his business, that when I finally destroy him, he won't see it coming until it's too late. When do you meet with him again? Diana smiled, cold and certain. I'm going to make him wait exactly 1 week. Long enough that he'll be excited when I finally reach out. Long enough that he'll be eager to show me everything I need to see. And then I'm going to take everything from him. His business, his money, his freedom, his future. everything he killed me for. And when he finally realizes who I am, when he sees his dead wife sitting across the boardroom table holding all the cards, that's when I'll know justice is done. She drove back to her temporary apartment, an upscale furnished rental in a high-rise with doorman security and mountain views. In the elevator, she caught sight of herself in the mirrored walls. A powerful woman in a designer suit, looking nothing like the soft-spoken physical therapist who had fallen from a helicopter 10 months ago. That night, Diana lay awake thinking about Norman's performance, his fake sympathy, the way he'd used her death as a tool. Tomorrow, she would send a carefully worded email to his office, expressing her continued interest in Richardson Aviation Consulting. And then, step by careful step, she would walk into Norman's life, into his business, into his confidence. A wolf in expensive clothing, coming for everything he'd stolen and so much more. Judith McDowell was dead, but Diana Westbrook was very much alive. And she was just getting started. Chapter 8. The Acquisition. The week Diana made Norman wait felt like a year. She used the time strategically, working with Marcus to finalize the financial structure that would allow her to acquire a controlling stake in Richardson Aviation Consulting. Every detail had to be perfect. One slip, one inconsistency in her documentation or her story, and everything would unravel. Marcus had assembled a team of silent partners, each contributing capital in exchange for eventual returns when the company was liquidated or sold. None of them knew the full story, only that Diana Westbrook was making a strategic investment in an aviation consulting firm with strong growth potential. "The money is clean," Marcus assured her, reviewing the wire transfer authorizations on his laptop. "It's coming from 3 different investment entities, all with legitimate business histories. When Norman's lawyers do their due diligence, everything will check out perfectly." Diana nodded, staring at the numbers on the screen. $3.2 million. That's what it would take to acquire 45% of Richardson Aviation Consulting, enough to make her the largest single shareholder and secure a board seat. Norman and Vanessa currently each owned 35%, with the remaining 30% split among 2 smaller investors who, according to Marcus's research, were passive and rarely involved in operations. "He's going to be thrilled," Diana said quietly. $3 million in cash injection means he can expand operations, maybe open that second office in Seattle he's been talking about. He'll see opportunity and growth, not the trap closing around him. On the 8th day after their initial meeting, Diana sent the email. It was perfectly crafted, professional but warm, expressing continued interest and requesting a formal meeting to discuss potential strategic partnership opportunities. Norman responded within an hour. His enthusiasm practically vibrated through the screen. He suggested lunch the following Tuesday at his office, followed by a comprehensive tour and presentation. "I'm excited to show you what we've built here," he wrote. "I think you'll be impressed." The Tuesday meeting was scheduled for 11:30 a.m. Diana arrived at 11:25, not too early to seem desperate, not late enough to be disrespectful. Richardson Aviation Consulting occupied the top 2 floors of a modern glass building in the Denver Tech Center, with sweeping views of the mountains. The reception area was sleek and professional, with framed photos of aircraft and aviation safety awards lining the walls. A young receptionist, her name tag read Melissa, greeted Diana with a bright smile. "Ms. Westbrook, Mr. Richardson is expecting you. Let me show you to the conference room." Diana followed her down a hallway lined with offices. She caught glimpses of the staff, about 15 people total, a mix of aviation consultants, administrative personnel, and technical specialists. Through one open door, she saw Vanessa Grant at her desk, on the phone, her expression intense and focused. The conference room was impressive. A long glass table, ergonomic chairs, a wall of windows overlooking the mountains, and a massive screen for presentations. Norman was there, along with a man Diana didn't recognize. "Diana, welcome," Norman said, standing to greet her. He was wearing an expensive suit, his smile wide and genuine. "Thank you for coming. I'd like you to meet Robert Chen, our Chief Financial Officer." "Robert, this is Diana Westbrook from Westbrook Capital." Robert Chen, no relation to Marcus, thankfully, was a thin man in his 50s with wire-rimmed glasses and a firm handshake. "Pleasure to meet you, Ms. Westbrook. I've prepared some financial documentation you might find interesting." They settled around the table, and Norman launched into a presentation that was clearly designed to impress. He walked her through Richardson Aviation's history, their client roster, which included several major airlines and private aviation companies, their safety record, and their growth projections. Diana asked sharp questions, demonstrating her expertise. She challenged some of their assumptions, pointed out potential market risks, and suggested alternative growth strategies. Norman seemed energized by the pushback, clearly enjoying the intellectual sparring with someone who understood the industry. After an hour of presentation, Vanessa joined them for lunch, catered from an upscale restaurant, served in the conference room. Diana watched the dynamics between Norman and Vanessa carefully. They were professional in front of her, but she caught the subtle signals. The way Vanessa's hand brushed Norman's arm when she handed him documents, the private glance they exchanged when they thought Diana was reviewing paperwork. "Your growth trajectory is impressive," Diana said, setting down her fork. "But I have to be honest. I'm not interested in being a passive investor. If Westbrook Capital is going to commit significant resources, I want a meaningful stake and an active role in strategic decisions." Norman and Vanessa exchanged a look. Robert shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable with where this was heading. "What kind of stake are we talking about?" Norman asked, his tone carefully neutral. Diana pulled out a document folder, prepared by Marcus, reviewed by 3 different lawyers to ensure it was ironclad. "I'm proposing a $3.2 million investment for a 45% equity position and a seat on the board. The capital injection would give you the resources to expand as you've planned, and my industry connections could open doors to clients you haven't been able to reach." The number hung in the air. Norman's eyes widened slightly. It was more money than he'd expected, but the equity demand was also larger than he'd probably wanted to give up. 45% would make you the largest shareholder," Vanessa said, her voice tight. "Norman and I would each be diluted to, what, about 27% each?" "Approximately, yes," Diana said calmly. "But you'd both retain significant ownership, you'd have substantial capital to grow the business, and you'd benefit from my network and expertise. This isn't a hostile acquisition. It's a strategic partnership where everyone wins." Robert cleared his throat. "I'd need to review the terms carefully, of course, but that's a substantial offer." Norman was quiet, clearly calculating. Diana could see the wheels turning, the money versus the control, the opportunity versus the risk. She waited, appearing relaxed and confident, as if she had all the time in the world and wasn't desperately invested in his answer. Could you give us a moment to discuss privately? Norman asked finally. Of course, Diana said, standing gracefully. I'll step outside. Take all the time you need. She walked to the reception area, her heart pounding despite her calm exterior. This was the crucial moment. If Norman rejected the offer, she'd have to find another way in, and the timeline would be disrupted. But if he accepted, Melissa offered her coffee, which Diana accepted, making small talk about Denver's weather and the beautiful office views. 15 minutes passed, then 20. Finally, Melissa's phone buzzed. Mr. Richardson is ready for you, Ms. Westbrook. Diana walked back to the conference room, her expression neutral. Norman stood at the window, his back to the door. Vanessa sat at the table, her arms crossed, clearly unhappy. Robert looked cautiously optimistic. Norman turned. Diana, we've discussed your offer and we're very interested. The capital injection would indeed allow us to execute our expansion plans faster than we'd anticipated. And your industry connections could be invaluable. Diana felt triumph surge through her, but kept her expression professionally pleased. I'm glad to hear that. I think this partnership could be extremely beneficial for everyone involved. However, Vanessa interjected, her tone sharp, we'd want some provisions in the agreement, specifically around decision-making authority and operational control. This is our company, and while we appreciate the investment, we need to ensure we're not being sidelined. Absolutely reasonable, Diana said smoothly. I'm not interested in running day-to-day operations. My focus is strategic direction, major decisions, financial oversight. Norman, you and Vanessa would continue to manage operations as you do now. I'd simply want quarterly reviews, financial transparency, and input on major contracts or expenditures. Over the next 2 hours, they hammered out the basic framework. Robert took notes, occasionally interjecting with financial considerations. Norman grew increasingly enthusiastic as they discussed expansion plans, new client acquisition strategies, and the potential for Richardson Aviation to become a national leader in aviation safety consulting. Vanessa remained skeptical, asking pointed questions about Diana's background, her other investments, her long-term vision. Diana answered everything smoothly, her fabricated history so well rehearsed it felt like truth. I'll have my lawyers draft a formal agreement, Diana said as they wrapped up. We should be able to finalize everything within 2 to 3 weeks if your legal team can move quickly. We can move quickly, Norman assured her. This is too good an opportunity to drag our feet. As Diana prepared to leave, Norman walked her to the elevator. When they were alone in the hallway, his demeanor shifted slightly. Less professional, more personal. I have to say, Diana, I'm really excited about this partnership. It's not just the money, though that's obviously significant. It's your vision, your energy. I think we're going to work very well together. I think so too, Norman, Diana said, meeting his eyes directly. I have a feeling this is the beginning of something transformative. The elevator doors opened, and she stepped inside. As they closed, she saw Norman watching her, a satisfied smile on his face. He thought he'd just secured a major investment from a wealthy, attractive woman who found him impressive. He had no idea he'd just invited his murder victim to take control of his company. Diana rode the elevator down in silence, her reflection staring back at her from the polished metal walls. When she reached the parking garage, she sat in her car for a long moment before starting the engine. Her phone buzzed. Marcus, how did it go? Diana typed her response. He took the bait. 45% equity, board seat, full financial access. We're in. Marcus's reply came immediately. Jesus, you did it. Now the real work begins. Diana started the car, pulling out of the parking garage into the bright afternoon sun. Now the real work begins, she repeated quietly to herself. Over the next 3 weeks, teams of lawyers worked to finalize the acquisition agreement. Diana's legal team, carefully selected by Marcus for their discretion and expertise, reviewed every clause, every provision, every potential loophole. Norman's lawyers did the same, conducting due diligence on Westbrook Capital, Diana's background, her financial capabilities. Everything checked out perfectly. Marcus and his team had created a backstory so comprehensive, so well documented, that it withstood intense scrutiny. Diana Westbrook was exactly who she claimed to be, a successful venture capitalist with a track record of smart investments in the aerospace sector. The signing took place on a Friday afternoon in a downtown law office. Diana wore a charcoal gray designer suit, her hair pulled back in a sleek bun, diamond earrings glinting under the fluorescent lights. She looked every inch the powerful investor she was pretending to be. Norman was there along with Vanessa and Robert. The atmosphere was celebratory. Norman had brought a bottle of expensive champagne for after the signing. To new partnerships, he said, raising his glass once all the documents were executed, and to the future of Richardson Aviation Consulting. To the future, Diana echoed, her smile cool and satisfied. They clinked glasses, and Diana took a sip of champagne that tasted like victory and vengeance mixed together. Norman was beaming. Vanessa was forcing a professional smile, and Robert looked relieved that the complicated financial transaction had closed smoothly. "I've arranged for an office for you," Norman said, "down the hall from mine. I thought it would be good to have you close by, so we can collaborate easily." "Perfect," Diana said. "When can I start?" "Monday. We'll introduce you to the team, get you set up with access to our systems, walk you through current projects." Diana nodded. "Monday works. I'm looking forward to really diving into the business, understanding how everything operates." What she didn't say was that she was looking forward to accessing their financial records, client files, and internal communications, to finding the evidence of Norman and Vanessa's systematic fraud, to building an airtight case that would send them both to prison for decades. That night, Diana met Marcus at a quiet restaurant far from downtown, in a neighborhood where no one from Richardson Aviation would ever venture. "You're inside," Marcus said, raising his beer in a toast. "Full access, board seat, financial oversight. Everything we planned." "Everything we planned," Diana agreed. "Now I need to find the evidence of their fraud without tipping them off." Norman trusts Diana Westbrook, but that trust is fragile. One wrong move, one question that sounds too suspicious, and he might start looking too closely. "You've come this far," Marcus said. "You can do this. Just remember, you're not Judith anymore. You're Diana. Keep that separation clear in your mind." Diana nodded, but she knew the truth was more complicated. She was both women now, Judith's rage and pain fueling Diana's cold strategic planning. The physical therapist who had trusted too easily and the venture capitalist who trusted nothing. The woman who had been pushed from a helicopter and the woman who was about to push back in ways Norman could never anticipate. "Monday," she said quietly. Monday, I walk into that office as a board member and major shareholder. Monday, I start dismantling everything Norman Richardson has built. And he's going to help me do it. Marcus studied her face across the table. Are you sure you're ready for this? Being in that office every day, working alongside him, pretending everything is professional and cordial when you know what he did. Diana's smile was cold, her eyes hard as diamond. I've been ready for this since the moment I dragged myself out of that mountain lake. Marcus. This isn't about being ready, this is about being inevitable. Norman Richardson tried to kill me for money. Now I'm going to use his own greed against him. I'm going to make him think I'm the best thing that ever happened to his company. Right up until the moment I destroy him completely. She raised her glass one more time. To Monday. To Monday, Marcus echoed. And to justice. They drank, and Diana felt the weight of the past 10 months settle on her shoulders. The pain of betrayal, the agony of recovery, the months of transformation and planning. It had all led to this moment. She was inside Norman's company, his business, his professional life. Soon, she would have everything she needed to take away his freedom. And unlike him, she would feel no remorse at all. Monday morning, Diana Westbrook arrived at Richardson Aviation Consulting at 8:45 a.m., early enough to show commitment, late enough to avoid seeming overeager. She carried an expensive leather briefcase and wore a navy blue dress with a structured jacket that projected authority and competence. Melissa at reception greeted her warmly. "Ms. Westbrook, welcome. Mr. Richardson asked me to show you to your new office." Diana's office was impressive, corner location. Floor-to-ceiling windows with mountain views, contemporary furniture, and a large desk with dual monitors already set up. It was 3 doors down from Norman's office and directly across from the conference room. "Mr. Richardson will be here shortly to help you get settled," Melissa said. "Can I get you anything? Coffee? Water?" "Coffee would be great, thank you." Diana set down her briefcase and walked to the windows, looking out at the Denver skyline. From here, she could see the mountains where Norman had tried to kill her. The irony was almost poetic. Impressive view, isn't it? Diana turned to find Norman in the doorway holding 2 coffee mugs. He dressed casually today. Expensive jeans, a button-down shirt, no tie. Apparently Mondays were casual at Richardson Aviation. "It's spectacular," Diana said, accepting the coffee mug he offered. "Thank you. I wanted to personally welcome you to the team," Norman said, settling into one of the chairs across from her desk. "This is a big moment for the company. Your investment is going to allow us to do things we've only been able to dream about." "I'm excited to be part of it," Diana said, sitting behind her desk. The position of power felt right, appropriate. "So walk me through the current projects. I want to understand where we are with existing clients and where you see the most growth opportunity." For the next hour, Norman gave her a comprehensive overview. There were contracts with 3 major airlines for safety protocol reviews, ongoing consulting work with several private aviation companies, and a new contract with the FAA for human factors research. What Norman didn't mention, but what Diana would soon discover, was that many of these contracts were being systematically overbilled. Services that took 10 hours were billed as 20. Standard consulting fees were inflated with additional research costs that were largely fictional. And the money was being funneled into accounts that Norman and Vanessa controlled personally. "I'd like to review the financials in detail," Diana said. Client contracts, billing records, expense reports. I want to understand the full picture of how money flows through the company. Something flickered across Norman's face. Was it concern? Hesitation? But it was gone so quickly Diana almost thought she'd imagined it. Of course, he said smoothly. Robert can get you access to our financial systems. We run everything through QuickBooks and maintain detailed records. Transparency is important to us. Excellent, Diana said. Because it's important to me too. I've found that companies that are careless with financial details tend to be careless in other areas as well. And in aviation safety consulting, carelessness can be fatal. The word fatal hung in the air between them for a beat. Norman's smile didn't waver, but Diana saw his jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. Agreed completely, he said, standing. Let me introduce you to the rest of the team. Monday morning all-hands meeting starts in about 10 minutes. The conference room was full when they arrived. 15 employees, the consultants, technical staff, and administrative team that kept Richardson Aviation running. Vanessa was already there, standing near the head of the table with a tablet in her hands. Norman introduced Diana, explaining her role as a major investor and new board member. The team's reactions varied. Some looked excited about the capital injection and growth opportunities. Others seemed wary of new oversight, and a few looked concerned about what changes might be coming. Diana gave a brief speech, carefully crafted to sound supportive and collaborative. I'm not here to change what's working, she said, making eye contact with various team members. I'm here to help scale it, to bring resources and connections that can take this company to the next level. My door is always open, and I'm looking forward to learning from all of you about what makes Richardson Aviation special. After the meeting, several employees stopped by to introduce themselves. Diana memorized names, roles, and faces. She noted who seemed nervous when talking to her and who seemed genuinely enthusiastic. She paid special attention to anyone who might become an ally, someone who might have noticed inconsistencies in billing or other irregularities. By the end of her first day, Diana had her computer access set up, her office organized, and initial access to the company's financial systems. Robert had given her a login and password, walked her through the basic structure, and promised to provide detailed reports by end of week. Is there anything specific you're looking for? Robert had asked, his tone slightly concerned. Just the standard investor due diligence, Diana had assured him. Cash flow analysis, revenue recognition patterns, expense ratios compared to industry standards. Nothing unusual. But there was something unusual in the way Robert had looked at her. A flicker of, was it relief or warning? Diana filed it away for future consideration. That evening, after everyone else had left, Diana sat in her office with the lights off, looking out at the city lights sparkling below. Her computer was still on, the financial software interface glowing on the screen. She'd spent the last 2 hours doing preliminary analysis, and already she was finding discrepancies. Client invoices that didn't match timesheets. Expenses that seemed inflated or entirely fabricated. Money flowing into accounts that weren't properly categorized. It was there, the fraud Marcus had suspected, the systematic theft that Norman and Vanessa had been conducting for years. Diana just needed to document it carefully, build an irrefutable case, and timing it perfectly. Her phone buzzed. Marcus, how was day 1? Diana typed back, I'm in. Full access. And the fraud is even bigger than we thought. This is going to work. She shut down her computer and gathered her things. Tomorrow she would dig deeper. She would start building the comprehensive evidence file that would eventually destroy Norman Richardson's life, his business, his freedom. But tonight, Diana Westbrook walked out of Richardson Aviation Consulting as its newest board member and largest shareholder. A position of power that Judith McDowell could never have imagined. The dead woman was taking control, and Norman Richardson still had no idea he was already finished. Chapter 9. The Walls Close In. Diana had been working at Richardson Aviation Consulting for 6 weeks when she found the smoking gun. It was buried in an expense report from 18 months ago, a $47,000 consulting fee paid to a shell company called Altitude Advisory Services. The payment was categorized as a subcontractor expense for a major airline safety audit, complete with a detailed invoice and service agreement. Except Altitude Advisory Services didn't exist. Diana had traced the company registration to a P.O. box in Delaware, followed the bank account to a holding company in Nevada, and finally discovered that the account's beneficial owners were Norman Richardson and Vanessa Grant. They'd created an entirely fictional consulting firm, billed their own company for services never rendered, and pocketed the money. And it wasn't an isolated incident. Over 3 years, Diana had documented 42 separate instances of similar fraud. Fake subcontractors, inflated expenses, phantom research costs, and overbilling that added up to just over $400,000 in stolen funds. Every transaction was carefully structured to look legitimate on the surface, but when examined closely, the pattern was unmistakable. Diana sat in her office late on a Friday evening, the building empty except for the cleaning crew on the floor below. Her computer screen displayed a spreadsheet Marcus had helped her create, a comprehensive map of every fraudulent transaction, complete with supporting documentation, bank records, and client files showing the real costs versus what had been billed. It was everything she needed to destroy them. But timing was critical. Move too fast, and Norman might flee before prosecutors could build their case. Wait too long, and he might detect her investigation and destroy evidence. Her phone buzzed. Norman's name appeared on the screen. "Still here? I saw your light on. Come have a drink in my office." Diana stared at the message for a long moment. Over the past 6 weeks, Norman had grown increasingly comfortable with her presence. He sought her advice on strategic decisions, included her in client meetings, and increasingly made comments that bordered on flirtation, nothing overt enough to be called inappropriate, but enough to signal his interest. Vanessa had noticed. Diana had caught the other woman watching them during meetings, her expression tight with barely concealed jealousy. The dynamic was shifting, fractures appearing in Norman and Vanessa's relationship as he became more focused on impressing their attractive new investor. Diana saved her work, locked her computer, and walked down the hall to Norman's office. He'd loosened his tie, his jacket draped over his chair, and 2 glasses of expensive bourbon sat on his desk beside the window. "I thought you could use a drink," Norman said, gesturing to the chair across from him. "You've been working insane hours. I appreciate the dedication, but I don't want you burning out. I believe in understanding every aspect of a business before making strategic recommendations," Diana said, accepting the glass. The bourbon was smooth and expensive, probably $200 a bottle. "I've been reviewing our financial structure, and I have some questions." Something flickered across Norman's face. "Questions about what specifically?" "Our subcontractor relationships." We seem to use a lot of external consultants for specialized work. I'm wondering if we could bring some of those capabilities in-house and improve our margins. Norman took a sip of his bourbon, his expression carefully neutral. We found that using specialists for certain projects is more cost-effective than maintaining full-time staff with those skill sets. Aviation safety is a complex field. Sometimes you need expertise that doesn't make sense to keep on permanent payroll. That makes sense, Diana said, watching him carefully. I'd like to review our subcontractor agreements in detail, see if we're getting good value, maybe renegotiate some terms. In particular, there's a company called Altitude Advisory Services that we seem to use frequently. I'd love to meet with them, understand their capabilities better. Norman's hand tightened on his glass. It was barely perceptible, but Diana saw it. The micro-expression of fear before his professional mask slid back into place. Altitude Advisory handles some specialized analysis work, he said smoothly. Very technical, very niche. I'm not sure a meeting would be productive. They're more back-end support than client-facing. Still, as the largest shareholder, I'd like to understand all our vendor relationships. Maybe you could set up a call? Or provide their contact information and I'll reach out directly. I'll look into it, Norman said, his tone suggesting the subject was closed. He changed direction quickly. But that's not why I asked you here. I wanted to talk about something else. Diana, I've been thinking. You and I have developed a good working relationship. More than that, I think we have a real rapport. And I was wondering if you might be interested in having dinner sometime. Outside the office. Just the two of us. There it was. The proposition she'd known was coming. Had even encouraged with carefully calculated moments of warmth and interest. Norman was attracted to Diana Westbrook. Saw her as a sophisticated, successful woman who understood his world. He had no idea he was propositioning his own murder victim. Diana took a slow sip of bourbon, letting him wait.
Norman, I'm flattered.
You're an impressive man, and I've enjoyed working with you. But I have a policy about not mixing business with personal relationships. It gets complicated. I understand, Norman said, leaning forward slightly. But Diana, I have to be honest with you. Since my wife died, I've been closed off, focused on work because it was easier than dealing with grief. But being around you, seeing your passion for the business, your intelligence, it's reminded me that life goes on, that it's okay to move forward. The audacity of it stunned her. He was using Judith's death, her murder, as a romantic overture, as proof that he was ready to move forward with someone new. I appreciate you sharing that, Diana said carefully. Losing your wife must have been incredibly difficult. But I still think we should keep our relationship professional. At least for now. The "for now" was deliberate bait, leaving the door open, keeping him interested. Norman smiled, clearly taking it as encouragement. I can respect that. For now. He raised his glass. To professional relationships and future possibilities. Diana clinked her glass against his, the sound sharp in the quiet office. To the future. As she left his office 20 minutes later, Diana felt the weight of her double life pressing down on her. She just flirted with her would-be murderer, deflected his advances while keeping him interested, and maintained her cover as Diana Westbrook even as Judith McDowell screamed inside her head. She drove back to her apartment, hands trembling slightly on the steering wheel. Marcus was waiting when she arrived, as they'd planned. He took one look at her face and poured 2 glasses of wine without asking. That bad? He asked me out, Diana said, sinking onto the couch. Used his grief over killing me as an explanation for why he's ready to start dating again. And Marcus, I found it. All of it. Over $400,000 in systematic fraud over 3 years. Fake companies, inflated expenses, phantom consulting fees. I have documentation, bank records, everything. Marcus leaned forward. Then we're ready to move. I've been coordinating with a contact at the FBI's white-collar crime division. They've been building a case on aviation industry fraud, and your evidence could be exactly what they need. But there's something else. He pulled out his phone, showing her a series of photos. I've been monitoring the helicopter company that Norman used for your accident. Their maintenance records were subpoenaed by the FAA as part of a routine safety audit. The harness you were wearing? It showed signs of tampering. Specifically, the release mechanism had been partially disengaged before the flight. Diana's breath caught. They can prove he tampered with it? Not definitively, not enough for a murder charge. But combined with the insurance policy, his affair with Vanessa, the financial fraud, and the timing, it builds a compelling narrative. The FBI is interested in talking to you. As Diana Westbrook, major shareholder who discovered the fraud. But Diana, Marcus hesitated. Once you go to the FBI, once this becomes official, you can't take it back. Norman will know you betrayed him. And if he figures out who you really are, he won't, Diana said firmly, because by the time he realizes anything, he'll be in handcuffs. When do they want to meet? Monday. They'll come to you at the office, make it look like a routine inquiry about industry practices. You'll provide the evidence. Express shock and concern as the responsible investor. They'll take it from there. Diana nodded, her mind already planning the next 72 hours. What about Vanessa? She's in this as deep as Norman. They'll both be charged. The question is whether one of them turns on the other to save themselves. Diana smiled coldly. My money's on Vanessa. She's smarter than Norman, and she doesn't have the same ego investment. Once she realizes the walls are closing in, she'll make a deal. That weekend, Diana prepared meticulously. She organized her evidence files, created backup copies, and stored everything in multiple secure locations. She practiced her statements to the FBI, rehearsing the tone of shocked dismay that a trusted partner would exhibit upon discovering fraud. On Sunday evening, she received a text from Norman. Thinking about you. Hope you're having a good weekend. Looking forward to seeing you tomorrow. Diana stared at the message, then typed her response. See you Monday. Have a good evening. Monday morning arrived with crystalline clarity. Diana dressed in a charcoal gray suit. Professional, serious, appropriate for what was about to unfold. She arrived at the office at 8:30 a.m., before most of the staff, and settled into her routine. At 10:15 a.m., 2 FBI agents appeared at reception. Special Agents Jennifer Torres and Michael Hammond, White Collar Crime Division. Melissa buzzed Diana's office, her voice uncertain. Ms. Westbrook, there are FBI agents here asking to speak with you. Send them in, Diana said calmly. Norman appeared in her doorway minutes later, his expression concerned. Diana, is everything okay? The receptionist said. FBI agents are here asking about our business practices, Diana said, her tone perfectly calibrated to sound worried but cooperative. I'm sure it's just routine industry inquiry, but perhaps you should join us? What Diana knew, and Norman didn't, was that the agents were here specifically to interview her first, to get her evidence before alerting Norman to the investigation. But appearances had to be maintained. The next 2 hours unfolded exactly as Marcus had orchestrated. The agents interviewed Diana, who expressed shock and concern as she provided her meticulously documented evidence. They interviewed Norman separately, whose initial confidence gradually eroded as their questions grew more specific. They requested access to financial records, which Robert Chin provided with trembling hands. By noon, the agents had what they needed. By 2 p.m., search warrants were being executed on Richardson Aviation's offices and on Norman and Vanessa's homes. By 4 p.m., both Norman and Vanessa were being escorted from the building in handcuffs, charged with wire fraud, conspiracy, and theft. Diana watched from her office window as they were loaded into separate FBI vehicles. Norman looked stunned, disbelieving. Vanessa looked furious, her face twisted with rage as she shouted something at the agents. Neither of them looked up at Diana's window. Neither of them suspected that their newest investor, their largest shareholder, the woman who had discovered their fraud, was anything other than what she appeared to be. As the FBI vehicles pulled away, Diana felt something shift inside her. Not satisfaction, not yet. That would come later, when Norman finally understood what had happened to him. When he realized that his dead wife had risen from the grave to destroy him. Marcus called as she was gathering her things to leave. It's done. They're both in custody. The charges are solid. They're looking at 10 to 15 years minimum. And Diana? Special Agent Torres said they want to talk to you again. About the helicopter incident. About the insurance policy. About whether there might be additional charges to consider. Diana looked out at the Denver skyline, at the mountains in the distance where she'd fallen, where she'd died and been reborn. Tell them I'm happy to cooperate with their investigation, she said quietly. Tell them Diana Westbrook will provide any assistance necessary to ensure justice is served. And Judith McDowell? Marcus asked softly. What about her? Diana was quiet for a long moment. Judith McDowell is still dead, but her ghost just sent Norman Richardson to prison. And sometimes that's enough. She hung up and walked out of Richardson Aviation Consulting for what might be the last time. The company would likely collapse now, with its leadership in federal custody and its reputation destroyed. Diana's investment was lost, but she didn't care. She'd never been investing in Richardson Aviation. She'd been investing in revenge. And the return on that investment was worth every penny. Thank you for watching this video to the end. I am pretty sure you enjoy it. We have a lot of other interesting and beautiful story lineup for you already. So click image showing on your screen to watch more.